Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Book Review Blog. Today we're going to review the book Creepshow. It's done by Stephen King, and it was made into a film um, by George A. Romero, or he was the one that directed it. And this is either, you could say, like a comic book or a graphic novel. This is what the book kind of looks like. Um, it features five little vignettes or five stories, and if you've seen the movie, you don't really need to read this, I imagine, because I've already seen this movie and it's very similar to it, but I'll still go on and tell you a little bit about it. The first little thing is a story called Father's Day, and it talks about a woman who um, 7 years before the present time had she had a father who was very mean to her and very mean to people around her. He wanted her always to stay with him, and like going so much as killing her fiance, and so she wouldn't get married and leave him. And one of her traditions on Father's Day was that she would make him a cake, and this woman's name was Bedelia, and every one Father's Day 7 years ago, her father was saying, I want my cake, Bedelia, where is my cake? And this was around the time where Bedelia's fiance was killed. And to get revenge on her father, she ended up killing him, and he was buried. And then go back to the present, where some members of Bedelia's family are talking about that one night where she had killed her father. And she was found innocent by reason of insanity type of thing. And every year since her father's death, Bedelia goes to her father's grave on Father's Day. And so Father's Day is that day in the present. And so you see Bedelia going up to her father's grave and telling her father how sorry she was that she had to kill him, but you kind of like made it for yourself, Dad, type of thing, or you brought it on yourself. And this particular Father's Day is a little different because her father actually starts to come to life, raises from the dead, and eventually kills Bedelia, and more things ensue, which I won't tell you about, but that's the end of that one. The next one is called The Lonesome Death of Geordie Verrill, and the only real character in this is a man named Geordie Verrill, and he's a simple farmer type of guy. He's not really the smartest guy, but he's kind of a little smart in his ways. But what happens is he's outside, and a meteor strikes his backyard and puts or meteorite, I should say, and he finds the meteorite, and he's like, oh, this is excellent, I can bring this to the local college and they'll pay money for this. And so he has little dreams about, being rich and famous by bringing this meteorite. Well, what happens is that the meteorite opens or breaks and opens, and this kind of gooey stuff comes out, which Geordie touches. And what he learns is that when on his fingers where he touched the goo, it starts to grow weeds or grass, and he learns that the little pit or the area where the meteorite struck is also starting to grow, and he also has little visions of going to his doctor and showing him this and things like that. But then he's realizing that this weeds or these grass is growing uncontrollably, where it's going with all around his body, and he does some action for it to get rid of it, and that's where I'm going to end the book because it's a very short book, or a very short story. The next story is called The Crate, and it takes place in a college town that's unknown, but how it starts is that a janitor named Mike Latimer is working at a local college, and he discovers a big crate. And he goes and tells a science professor about it named Dexter Stanley. And Dexter and him go and find the crate, and they take it out, and Mike is lifting the crate up, and they realize that there is something deadly, like a deadly animal or a deadly being that's in the crate, and it ends up killing Mike, like eating him alive. And Dex is really taken by this, and so he leaves the crate there, and he runs and goes to find another professor named Harry Wentworth, or Northrop, excuse me. Henry Northrop is his name. And Henry has a wife named Wilma, and if you would have met Wilma, she'd be like, oh, call me Billy. And Billy is very mean to Henry. She's very, putting him down all the time, so he doesn't really love his wife anymore. And, when Dex tells Henry about this crate and this animal, and shows him what has happened and tells him how this crate animal thing has killed Mike, Henry gets an idea of how he is going to end his relationship with Billy. And so he basically lures Billy down to where the crate is, and Billy ends up getting eaten. So, and, you're not really sad that Billy gets eaten, because again, you know how mean she is to Henry and type of thing. It's one of those that, like, okay, you deserve it type of things. And so that's where the book ends, or that little story. So the next story is called Something to Tide You Over. And what it is there's a man named Richard Vickers, and he has learned that his wife Becky has had an affair with a man named Henry Wentworth. And rather than letting it go, or just saying to Becky, okay, I know you're having an affair, I'll give you, if you want to end this marriage, I'll give you a divorce, blah, blah, blah. He takes matters in his own hands, and he lures Becky and Henry by gunpoint to a beach where an ocean is, and he digs a hole for them and makes them sit in the hole and buries them kind of alive, except for their heads, and tells them that if soon the tide is going to come in, and if they survive, they can, because the tide is going to come in over their heads, and if they survive, then they can, live happily ever after type of thing. Well, they don't survive, obviously, and Richard goes back to his house on the beach and thinks, okay, this is all fine, they're dead, I'll check them back later and, dispose of the bodies, such and such. But he goes back and realizes the bodies aren't there, and then he gets scared, and he goes back home and realizes that now Becky and Henry are dead, like, I guess zombies, if you want to call it, like undead creatures that walk. And they catch up with Richard, and he's, of course, very scared, because now dead people are talking and walking and things like that. And so Becky and Henry lure Richard to the beach and make Richard sit in the beach up to his head and basically say, okay, you're now the tide is going to come and wash you, and if you survive, blah, blah, blah. And you don't know if Richard survives or not. You kind of assume he doesn't, but maybe he does. Anyway, the last little vignette story is called They're Creeping Up on You, and it's the only real character that you see is an elderly man named Upson Pratt, and he's a millionaire guy who lives in like a penthouse apartment, and if you would look in his apartment, it's very clean, and because Upson Pratt is a germaphobe and he hates bugs, But Upson Pratt is kind of having a teeny little cockroach problem. I'm going to say that. And where he only sees like maybe one or two cockroaches at first, but he calls an exterminator and says, "You got to come and get this because I cannot have bugs and they're creeping up on me," type of thing. But what the audience sees and what Upson hasn't realized yet is that there are cockroaches everywhere in his apartment, and eventually he sees it, and that's kind of the end of Upson, I guess, in a way. But one thing that I hadn't really said about this book, and I'll kind of you can kind of see the cover. This guy right here, there it is. He introduces every story, and he calls himself the Creep, and which I guess is where they get the title from. And it's kind of like the Crypt Master or the Crypt Keeper, I guess, in the old Tales from the Crypt show. He has very similar mannerisms and kind of similar wordings. If you haven't watched the movie, I do recommend you see it because it's like a little cute thing related to Stephen King fans, because Stephen King actually plays the role of Jordy Verrill in the movie, and that's kind of cute to see. And there's a little part, again, if you see, there's a little part with this boy in the beginning of the movie, and the boy is played by Stephen King's son, Joe. You would know him as Joe Hill. He's another author as well. So anyway, that's that book. The next book that I'm going to read the book is actually called Different Seasons. You can see it on the bottom there. This one just happens to feature Apt Pupil. So I'll explain why that is and everything about that in the next my next review. So I bid you farewell and happy reading.